can we use class actions to constrain this administration? The answer is complicated. Because in some cases, class actions can be useful, and in fact, there are some examples. In front of Judge Boasberg, there's a pending class action involving people who were deported to CICOT in El Salvador, and he's ordered the return of a number of those individuals, and that is progress. But there's also a lot of limitations. The first one is when you're dealing with the federal government, if you want monetary damages, if you want money, you have to overcome sovereign immunity. And that only happens when there's a waiver, which may not be available in many cases. And then we look at, okay, injunctive relief. We can force the administration to do something. There's a lot of problems with that. First, courts are often slow, and that's not their fault. They're just busy. The second thing is there are a number of doctrines that permit courts or allow courts to avoid answering questions that are within the purview of one of the other branches. This is called the political question doctrine. And so, for example, if something is specifically delegated to another branch in the Constitution, courts are going to often avoid trying to resolve that, whether or not something was permissible within the scope of that authority. That's not always applied, but that's another limitation. There's also the issue of whether or not the defendant, the United States, actually complies with court orders, which has not been the case recently. And the judiciary doesn't have any way to enforce its own orders. It relies on the executive branch in all cases to enforce the orders that it issues. And if the executive branch doesn't enforce those orders, there's nothing the court can do other than threaten contempt. But once again, if the executive doesn't comply, it doesn't matter. And the final issue is the whack-a-mole problem. And this is most apparent, kind of with the Trump travel bans in his first administration, where one would get struck down and then all of a sudden there's a new one the next day that's slightly different, and that one goes into effect. And so at the end of the day, if the executive branch wants to run roughshod over the Constitution, there's very little the judiciary can do to prevent that from happening. That role is delegated to Congress, and they need to impeach and convict Donald Trump for ignoring our Constitution. And really, that's the only solution at the end of the day. Class actions may be able to provide wins here or there, provide some relief, but at the end of the day, it's not going to stop the problems.